Howdy guys, I hope y'all are doing well. Today we're going to go over a pretty interesting subject. We're going to look at, really I want to bring is more context in beginning stages of the Last Supper so that we can understand more contextually what Jesus is doing and why it's so important the actions he takes, in particular the washing of the disciples' feet and the message he is sending by who he chooses, what he's doing. So we're going to start in John 13, 1 through 7. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And the supper being ended, the end of the supper, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he was come from God, and went to the Father, he riseth from supper, and laid aside his garments, and took a towel, and girded himself. And after that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with a towel wherewith he was girded. And he cometh to Simon Peter, and Peter saith unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? And Jesus answered him and said unto him, What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. So Jesus, the master of the Last Supper, the master of the disciples, gets up, takes off his rabbinical robe, his robe of authority, lays it aside, and takes on the attire of a servant, of a slave, to be honest with you. In that time, there was only one thing a servant could not, two things a servant could not do, or a slave could not do to their master. Latch their sandals for them, or wash their feet. That was the only things off limits to even a slave during that point. And Jesus goes even further than that to show his humility under his disciples. Now, why is this so important that Jesus comes unto Peter? He gets up, takes his rabbinical robe off, and he comes up to Peter to wash his feet. So let's continue in 8 through 17. And Peter said unto him, Thou shalt never wash my feet. Jesus said, If I wash thee not, thou hast no part in me. Simon Peter saith unto them, Lord, not on my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said unto him, He that is washed needeth not save to wash his feet, but is very clean every whit. And ye are clean, but not all. For he knew that he who should betray him, therefore said he, Ye are not all clean. So, after he had washed their feet, and had taken his garments, and was set down again, he said unto them, Know ye what I have done to you? Ye call me Master and Lord. Ye say, Well, for I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. What does he mean by this? We'll get to that. For I have given you an example, that ye should do as I have done to you. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. If ye know these things, happy are ye to do them. So Jesus is the master of the table there. He's the master. Yet the master serves others. He serves those at the table. Now let's see why it is in particular that Peter is singled out here. Why is none of the other disciples mentioned? Why is Peter singled out? Verse 18 to 23. I speak not of you all. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture might be fulfilled, he that eateth bread with me hath lifted up his heel against me. Now I tell you before it come, that when it come to pass, ye may believe that I am he. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that receiveth whomsoever I send receiveth me. He that receiveth me receiveth him that sent me. And when Jesus had thus said, he was troubled in spirit, and testified, saying, Verily, verily, I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. That's interesting. It says that Jesus was troubled in his spirit, and probably downcast, or even maybe possibly sad, or felt I don't want to say empathy, but sympathy for the wickedness that one of his disciples was about to do, the sin that he was about to commit, throwing everything away to do this evil deed. And it says that Jesus was troubled within him. Okay? Now, then the disciples looked one on another, doubting of whom he spake. And there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Now, it is generally held that it is John, because John always refers to himself as the disciple of whom Jesus loved. So John is leaning on Jesus' breast. How is this possible? I mean, when we look at the Last Supper, that would kind of be, a bit strange, right? If you really think about it. It's a bit weird. But the thing is, the Last Supper is not like what we picture it to be. Our assumption is based basically on the Leonardo da Vinci painting of the Last Supper, where they're all sitting at a regular old Western table, big chairs, Jesus in the middle. That's not how it was. That's not how the Last Supper was. They did not have that style of seating yet. So, the basic layout was a kind of a Western type. It was a Romanesque type of seating. So what it would be is they would have long benches and a pillow at the end of the bench, and then the table. And it was usually shaped like a U. So everybody would come around, so here all the way around. Okay? And they would be leaning like this on the pillow, and they would be eating food like this. So now you see, Jesus is here, John's on his right, his head's here. So now you see why John is able to look up to Jesus and talk to him in a little bit, which is what we're going to get to see. So keep this in mind. Verses 24 through 25, Simon Peter therefore beckoned to him that he should ask who it should be of whom he spake. He then, lying on Jesus' breast, saith unto him, Lord, who is it? So Peter, he beckons to John. Now, if Peter's sitting right beside John, this wouldn't work. He wouldn't have to beckon and motion to him, try to get his attention, say, hey, John, ask him what he means. Who's he talking about? The most likely scenario is that Peter is on the opposite side of the table, across from John. Okay? Jesus. Okay, so the order of the table would be John, Jesus. We haven't got to the next one yet, but Peter way over here on the opposite side of the table. And so, another reason we know this is because he's motioning to them, and none of the other disciples know what's going on. They never even catch it. It's just this tiny, subtle thing that Peter looks across the table, beckons to John, hey, ask him who it is. And so John leans up and says, Lord, who is it? And nobody hears him because John's right here. He's leaning against him, right in front of him. Okay? So now we must see the next part of this, okay, of what's going on. So I want to go through of what this style of seating arrangements meant in that time in the Near East. See, the master would always sit surrounded by his most trusted and beloved people, okay? The one on the far right would be like the most high or beloved position. The one on the right of the master is the most beloved. Why do you think John always says, the disciple whom Jesus loved? Then on the left of the master would be the person with the highest office or position of power in the group. Okay? And then, as you go around the table, it goes from least to greatest as you go around the table, until you finally get to the far end of the table, which would be the servant's position, the lowliest position at the table there is. Of all the people in the group, that would be the lowest. So we see John sitting on the right of Jesus, at the front, Peter on the very end. And it's interesting when we read Acts, and we see, or even the Gospels, we see Peter and John are together a lot of times. They seem to be together quite often. So it's just interesting how Peter and John are always together. Now, why would John be at the very front as the beloved part? Who knows? But John was most likely the very youngest of the disciples, because he lived into the 90s AD, and we're talking about this happening in about 30 or 33 AD. He would have been been young. He would have been probably the youngest of the disciples. And why you can see that John has such a passion and love in his gospel when he's writing about Jesus and how much Jesus loved him. Because it was something that was in his youth he saw and felt, passionately. So now let's go on to the next part. Okay, verses 26 or 30. And Jesus answered, He it is to whom I shall give a sop, a piece of bread, after I have dipped it. And when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. So that means right beside him is Judas. And after the sop, Satan entered into him. Then said Jesus unto him, That thou doest, do quickly. Now no man at the table knew what intent he spake this unto him. For some of them thought, because Judas had the bag, or was the treasurer, had the money bag of the group, that Jesus had said unto him, Buy those things which we need of against the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. He then, having received the sop, went out immediately, and it was night. So Judas is the one sitting to the left, in the highest position of the group, on the left-hand side of Jesus, the Master. So we see Judas the betrayer. Now we know he's a thief because John tells us that. He stole from the bag of money. Judas arranged himself to sit in the most exalted place in the Last Supper. What does that tell us about Judas? Pride. It tells us he is very prideful and arrogant, thinking himself greater than all the rest. Now, why is it so important that Jesus, when he washes the feet, zeroes in on Peter? Above all else, it's Peter we are to talk to. Maybe even Peter first. And I think it is Peter first. Why? Well, let's go to Matthew 23, 11 through 12. This is Jesus speaking about a week or so before the Last Supper. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. So we see the two opposing sides at the Last Supper. Apparently, Peter remembered and had learned something from this teaching Jesus gave. Because during Matthew 23, this is when he is basically railing against the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the elites, talking about how horrible they are and thinking that they're better than everybody else and all these other things. And it's interesting that Judas, when he betrays Jesus, who does he go to? Straight to those people. Peter hears Jesus say this. And where does he go at the Last Supper? He arranges himself in the seat of the lowliest servant at the table, proving himself to be humble, or humbling himself before Jesus and everyone else. Yet it is Peter who Jesus later comes to wash his feet. The master of the table goes to the lowliest one at the table and zeroes in on him. He is the one that is exalted above the rest. And you have Judas, who exalted himself, but then ends up being abased for his work. And so it's interesting to note too that Peter is the one that Jesus says after the resurrection, Feed my flock. Feed my flock. Feed my lambs. He is putting Peter as the head of the disciples to take care of them, to lead them going forward. Yet, to be that servant unto them all. Such interesting to see these things. So we see Peter humbling himself among the brethren, and Jesus honoring him through that. So we give Peter a lot of grief for being brash, kind of boneheaded, or slow-learned. But if you really think about it, Jesus saw something very particular in Peter. He chose Peter. He says, I have chosen all 12 of you, but he singles Peter out many instances. So maybe we shouldn't give Peter too much, lowliness all the time, considering we'd probably be probably much worse than Peter if we were in their shoes. But I hope that this was interesting to show that in order to be exalted, we must be willing to be servant to all, to be able to humble ourselves as our Lord humbled before us. He said, I did this as a symbol to you all, as a guide to you all. that we're not to be masters over one another, but to love one another. And over again, after this takes place, Jesus emphasizes, love one another. Because when you love somebody enough, you don't care about who's leading, who's not. You are just so entwined together that neither party cares what decisions are being made or when. It is all about loving, caring for one another above all else. Okay? So thank you guys so much for listening. I hope it was an interesting and edifying study. And I wish y'all the very best. God bless.